Barcelona, evening. The streets are lit by the soft glow of street lamps, with passers-by rushing home, leaving only the sound of footsteps and conversations in various languages behind them. In one of the old neighborhoods of the city, among the narrow streets of the Gothic Quarter, there was a cozy restaurant called La Serenità. At its doors, hidden from curious eyes, worked a young chef, Daniel. Daniel was a man with a kind heart, and his care for others went beyond just doing his job. Every evening after the restaurant closed, he would go into the pantry and start packing up the leftover food. He didn't throw it away like many others did. Instead, he collected bags of hot meals and headed to the nearest park. There, in the dark corners and abandoned streets, he would find homeless people who had long given up hope of receiving help. No one knew about this, but for Daniel, it was more important than working in the kitchen. He believed that at least during these evenings, he could change someone's life. That evening, Daniel was especially focused on his work. The restaurant was quiet, with only the sound of knives, the clinking of pots, and the sizzling of pans in the kitchen. He had just finished preparing dinner and checked the tables, thinking about the best way to distribute the leftover food. His mind was no longer occupied with career plans or money. He was only thinking about how to help those who couldn't afford hot meals. Just as Daniel was packing the last portion, the door to the supply room creaked open, and a man appeared around the corner. His face was familiar. It was one of the regular customers of the restaurant, always alone, always in a suit. He came rarely, but whenever he did, he was always accompanied by someone important. The man, named Luis, approached Daniel with curiosity in his eyes. "What are you hiding here?" he asked, noticing how the chef carefully arranged the food packages. Daniel froze. He hadn't expected anyone to notice his actions. A wave of anxiety washed over him. He didn't know what to say. But Luis wasn't the typical customer. He was attentive and sharp-eyed. Despite his wealthy appearance and the surroundings, he was also someone who understood the value of simple things. It's not for me," Daniel said, feeling his face turn red. Luis didn't seem shocked, but his gaze remained wary. He continued watching Daniel's actions as though something in this process was important to him. He silently observed as Daniel packed the last food bag and then quietly disappeared into the darkness through the restaurant's back door. "Where are you going?" Luis couldn't hold back his curiosity. Daniel froze. He knew he had to do something important, but he could no longer hide it. He sighed and replied, "It's for people who need help. I can't just throw away food." Luis paused. This was more than just cooking. It was a moral choice that meant more than any job in a prestigious restaurant. The next morning, when Daniel came to work, he noticed that the atmosphere in the restaurant had changed. His colleagues were strangely cautious, and several people were clearly avoiding his gaze. He couldn't understand what was happening until he noticed a few subtle documents on the table. At that moment, Luis entered the restaurant, his face serious, and his eyes fixed on Daniel with unwavering determination. He approached the manager and whispered something in his ear. Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. His heart started beating faster. He couldn't believe that all of this was happening because of one small action. Soon, the restaurant manager called him into the office. Daniel entered, feeling his shoulders tense up. "Daniel, we have a problem," said the manager. "We've been informed that you're giving food to the homeless. Not only does this violate our rules, but it could also affect the restaurant's reputation." Daniel tried to explain, but the manager interrupted him. "You're fired. I understand your concern, but actions like these can't go unpunished." Daniel left the job without a word. He knew his actions were right, but the consequences were too serious. When he stepped out onto the street, it felt like the world had turned upside down. He had lost everything he had to help others. But at that moment, as he walked toward his apartment, fate had a surprising encounter in store for him. Daniel sat on a bench in the park, trying to figure out what to do next. He didn't regret his actions, but the thought of being fired weighed heavily on him. He could leave and find another job, but he didn't know how to deal with what he had been living for. He didn't want to give up. Suddenly, a man approached him, stopping next to the bench. Daniel looked up and saw someone he didn't recognize, but he instinctively understood that this person was not just a passerby. "Are you okay?" the man asked, his voice warm and calm. "I lost my job," Daniel replied, not hiding his sadness. "I did what I thought was right, but it seems like it doesn't matter to anyone else." The man sat down beside him, his gaze penetrating. "Sometimes doing the right thing leads to great losses, but you shouldn't give up." When Daniel looked back at the man, he seemed to smile, as if he already knew how to help him. "My name is Keanu. I heard about what you did, and I'm here to offer you some help." Daniel couldn't believe his ears. Keanu Reeves. Yes, the Keanu Reeves. He was standing right in front of him, ready to offer help. It wasn't just a coincidence. It was meant to be. Keanu offered Daniel not just a job or money, but an opportunity to create something bigger. He called his partners and set up a meeting with several charitable organizations that supported projects to help the homeless. Keanu said he wanted Daniel to continue his work, but at a new level, with real support. "Your idea is not just about handing out food, it's about change. You can change lives. I'll help you." Daniel felt hope rise within his heart. He was ready to move forward. But Keanu offered more than just funding. He offered support, resources, and connections that would allow Daniel to make everything he had only dreamed of come true. "Together, we can make sure people see your work and support it," Keanu said, his voice full of confidence. It was at that moment that Daniel realized his life was just beginning. This encounter had become a moment of truth for him. He was no longer alone. When Keanu Reeves offered his help, Daniel felt the ground beneath his feet slip away. He was used to fighting alone, and the offer from a celebrity seemed almost unreal. But when Keanu calmly said that he believed in Daniel's abilities and was ready to provide resources to help his work reach a new scale, Daniel felt his life change. Keanu met with him a few days after their first conversation. He told Daniel that he wasn't just going to help him with money, but he was going to create a platform to spread the aid, one that would cover not just the city, but also other regions of the country. The project was to become large-scale, ongoing, and most importantly, it wasn't just for show. It was meant to genuinely change the situation. "We'll do this together," Keanu said, looking Daniel in the eyes. "You know what needs to be done, and I know how to provide the resources. Our goal is to help those who've been pushed to the margins of life. We can do this." Daniel was stunned. He never thought his personal initiative could become so large, but his first steps weren't easy. Behind all the beautiful plans, there were many challenges. Daniel faced bureaucracy, difficulties with obtaining permits, the need to negotiate with various organizations and suppliers. Every step was hard, and at times he felt like the task was just too much. Keanu was always there, giving advice, sometimes meeting with potential partners personally, supporting the idea, and doing everything to make sure the project didn't fall apart at the start. One day, after a long workday when Daniel was nearly ready to give up, Keanu approached him. "Don't forget, there will always be obstacles, but it's those obstacles that make success meaningful. You're not alone in this." Keanu calmly said these words, as though he knew exactly what Daniel was feeling. Those words gave him new strength. Daniel picked up the work again with renewed energy. He realized that the key to success wasn't avoiding problems, but accepting them and pushing forward. A few months later, the work began to bear fruit. The project gained popularity, people responded to the call for help, and support from entrepreneurs and organizations was becoming more tangible. Daniel and his team managed to organize the first major food distribution campaigns to help the homeless. The project became more widely known, and they started receiving help from all corners of the country. Keanu didn't intervene in every little detail, but his advice was invaluable. He helped Daniel organize meetings with new partners and taught him how to communicate effectively with people to achieve results. Sometimes it's important just to listen. People are ready to help, but only if you're sincere with them, Keanu would say during meetings with potential donors. And with each passing day, Daniel became more and more convinced that he was on the right path. This wasn't just a project, this was his life. But as soon as the project began to gain momentum, a new obstacle appeared. One evening, Daniel received a call from one of his partners. He was informed that there had been reports in the media about illegal activities related to charitable foundations, and now all the foundations working with them were under investigation. Daniel couldn't believe his ears. Everything they had done with Keanu was honest and transparent. But rumors sometimes spare no one. Soon, journalists started asking questions, and social media was flooded with negative comments and suspicions. Daniel was at a loss. He didn't know how to fight this. It was a real test. And just at that moment, Keanu showed up. Don't worry. No matter how much dirt they throw at you, it's not what they say that matters, but what you do. Let's focus on results, not opinions. Keanu said this so confidently that Daniel felt his own doubts begin to fade away. You're right, Daniel replied. Do the right thing and people will see it. The threat of the project's closure wasn't as real as it initially seemed. With the contacts they had established with their partners, as well as the support of people who truly cared, the project continued to run. Daniel learned not to be afraid of challenges. Now his eyes were filled with determination. He knew that he couldn't change the world in a single day, but every step he took still mattered. The project became stable, and its impact only continued to grow. Many years later, when the project had become international and their help had reached many countries, Daniel met with Keanu again. They sat on the terrace of a cafe, discussing the years that had passed. You did it, Daniel. You didn't just help the homeless. You helped people see that anything is possible, Keanu said. Daniel replied with a smile. Thank you for believing in me. It's all thanks to you. It wasn't just the beginning of a new life, but a new stage in his journey. And despite the hardships and challenges, he knew that everything he had done was meaningful. As the days passed, Daniel became more and more famous. His homeless assistance project gained popularity, and people started recognizing him on the streets. He was no longer just that restaurant worker. He had become a symbol of real change that could happen if each person decided to contribute. Daniel couldn't believe that his work was truly changing other people's lives. But as strange as it seemed, it was him who became the driving force behind these changes. His whole life had turned upside down, and success came to him when he least expected it. Daniel wasn't prepared for fame, but he knew that this wasn't the end, but just the beginning of the journey. With the rise in popularity of his project, collaboration offers began to come in, including from large companies who wanted to help. But the most unexpected offer came from the very restaurant where he had once worked. One evening, several weeks after the project started to gain significant recognition, Daniel received a call. It was his former boss, Giorgio. He invited him to meet at the restaurant. Daniel, we've seen how you've helped people, and we really liked it. We want to offer you support. We will supply food for your project. This will be our way of supporting your endeavor. Daniel was stunned. The restaurant, which had always been a closed-off world for ordinary people, suddenly offered him help. It was hard to grasp, as it had always employed elite chefs, and its kitchen was known for its exquisite dishes. And now all of these dishes were supposed to be part of his charity initiatives. I don't know what to say, Giorgio. I didn't expect the restaurant to want to support me in this way. It means so much, Daniel said, struggling to hold back tears. You've proven that your cause is worth believing in, and if each of us does even a little bit, the world will be a better place. This is our contribution, Giorgio smiled. Daniel couldn't believe that this restaurant, which had always been a symbol of elite cuisine, would now be providing food to those who needed it most. It was an incredible turn of events. But with the new offer came new challenges. The restaurant, like any business, was concerned about its reputation. They couldn't just start distributing food without considering all the legal and logistical aspects. Daniel faced a new set of difficulties: how to properly integrate the restaurant into the homeless assistance system, how to ensure the quality and freshness of the food. Daniel began meeting regularly with Giorgio and other restaurant representatives to coordinate the details. They discussed which dishes would be used for charity, how to organize delivery, and which forms of cooperation would be the most effective. These meetings weren't easy, but they were necessary. Daniel understood that the success of the project depended on how well they could manage all these aspects. He not only became a leader in the charitable initiative, but also a real businessman, learning the intricacies of organizing operations. Soon, the restaurant began supplying food to the homeless on a regular basis. It wasn't just leftovers, it was fresh food, prepared with love and care. From time to time, Daniel even saw the restaurant's chefs come to the distributions to help in person. The partnership with the restaurant wasn't just successful, it was a true example of how business and charity could go hand in hand. For Daniel, this was an incredible achievement, and he once again realized that when everyone unites for a common goal, the result can be truly powerful. Soon, other local restaurants, shops, and businesses joined their project. And all of this became possible because one person decided to help. This was the moment when Daniel fully realized that his actions and efforts were truly changing people's lives. But this story wasn't over. The project continued to grow, and more people were receiving help. Soon, the city began to notice that charity could be not only a part of social responsibility, but also a part of the city's everyday life. It wasn't just help for those who couldn't afford food. It was an important step in building a community that supported one another. Standing in front of the restaurants that had once symbolized elite life for him, Daniel now felt that he was not alone. He had made his life a part of something much bigger. With the help of the restaurant and all those who supported him, Daniel knew that even more grandiose projects lay ahead, ones that could change the lives of even more people. Despite the success and growth of the project, Daniel faced insurmountable challenges. His charity organization, despite the support from restaurants and volunteers, began to encounter a number of new problems he hadn't anticipated at the start. First and foremost, these were issues with funding. Although the restaurants were providing food, the costs for organizing delivery, renting storage and distribution spaces, and covering administrative expenses were becoming increasingly heavy for one person to bear. Every day, Daniel woke up with the thought of how to solve the current problems. At some point, he felt like he had hit a dead end. He couldn't figure out how to continue, as resources were limited and the support was inconsistent. The project, which once seemed so exciting, began to feel like a heavy responsibility. At that moment, as always, Keanu came to the rescue. He could see that Daniel was struggling. They had long become good friends, and Keanu was always there when needed. "You're not alone in this, Daniel. You just need to take a little break and see that there are other ways. I'll talk to some of the restaurants and see who might be able to help," Keanu said when he noticed how exhausted Daniel was. His words sounded calm and confident, and it gave hope. Keanu was a true friend, supporting Daniel not only morally, but also willing to use his connections and resources to solve the problem. He promised to help find new funding sources and restaurants that could join the project. Keanu got to work. He used his connections with other restaurants, knowing that successful chefs and business owners who were willing to contribute could be found in every corner of the city. Keanu knew that many restaurant owners, despite their business interests, understood the value of good deeds and were ready to help. He went to the most prestigious restaurants, explaining the idea behind the project to the owners and asking them to get involved. A few days later, Keanu returned with good news. He had managed to convince several elite restaurants to join the project, offering their dishes to be distributed to those in need. "Now we have support, Daniel." "You're not alone," Keanu said with a smile. His confidence was contagious, and Daniel, who was on the brink at that moment, felt reassured. Thanks to Keanu's efforts, the number of restaurants participating in the project increased significantly. The restaurants not only began supplying food, but they also started organizing joint charity events, such as dinners for the poor, with the participation of chefs, where funds were raised to continue the work. One of the new partners, a restaurant with a unique concept that served only organic and seasonal dishes, offered to create a special menu for those in need. These dishes were prepared with the same attention and care as for regular customers, adding more value to the project. Daniel once again felt how the power of good deeds helped overcome barriers. Keanu not only saved the project from potential collapse, but also taught Daniel to look for solutions in the most difficult situations. However, the problems didn't disappear entirely. Despite the support from the restaurants, Daniel still faced some difficulties related to coordinating operations and organizing logistics. He realized that he needed to take one more step to ensure the project's long-term sustainability. Keanu suggested he turn to investors who could support the project not only with money, but also with their business expertise. One evening, when they were sitting together again, Keanu said, "If you want this to become something bigger, you need to think not just about surviving today. You have to think about making the project sustainable and long-term. Give people the chance to invest not only money, but also their heart." Daniel stood on the roof of one of the buildings, watching as the sun slowly dipped below the horizon. He felt somewhat empty. With each passing day, his project grew more expansive, but inside he continued to feel like something was missing. Perhaps he was seeking something greater than just helping the homeless. Perhaps it was his personal mission, his drive toward a goal that didn't just solve a problem, but truly changed lives. But the further he moved forward, the more palpable this emptiness became. The project continued to develop, and the restaurants, volunteers, and all the people who supported him gave him strength. But sometimes Daniel felt overshadowed by the fact that his actions were becoming mechanical. He couldn't stop, he couldn't leave it behind, because he knew that if he did, the project might end, and all those who had already started receiving help might end up back on the streets. In those moments, his own emotions stayed in the background, his worries were ignored. Keanu Reeves was the person who was always there when needed. He helped not only with logistics, but also supported Daniel morally. He was the one who showed him the way when Daniel lost his path. But in recent weeks, Keanu had noticeably changed. He didn't come as often, and his support became more distant. Daniel didn't want to ask questions, but his worry grew with each passing day. One evening, when the project had reached its peak and the number of people in need kept increasing, Daniel called Keanu. His friend's voice was surprisingly quiet, and his words fragmented. "Daniel, I can't be there anymore. My time has come. You have to continue alone," Keanu said, barely audible. At first, Daniel didn't understand what that meant. He tried to clarify, but Keanu simply hung up. Daniel felt something tighten in his chest, as though the entire world had suddenly cracked into 1,000 pieces under his nails. Daniel couldn't understand what was happening. His friend, who had been there all this time, had decided to leave. For him, Keanu wasn't just a friend, but an important mentor, someone who believed in him when everyone else doubted. He called again, but Keanu didn't answer. Daniel felt alone, despite all the people who had been helping. It was like losing a part of himself. He couldn't believe that Keanu had decided to walk away from everything connected to the project. He didn't know what to do. He felt broken, but he understood one thing. Now everything depended on him. He couldn't abandon the project. He couldn't leave the people who had already started relying on his help. It was more than just handing out food. It was a responsibility for the lives of people, and he was ready to continue. But that meant he had to move forward, even if he had no strength left. The project continued to operate, but with each passing day, Daniel felt like he was running out of energy. He sought support from others, but each day became harder. Soon, when it seemed like there was no road left ahead, he made a decision. He had to end the project, not because he didn't care, but because he realized if he continued, it wouldn't be sincere. It would just be a mechanical action. On the last day, when the food distribution was scheduled, Daniel went to the place where he had started his journey. He watched as people approached, received food, smiled, and thanked him. And then he realized he didn't need to prove anything anymore. He had already done everything he could. At that moment, standing in the shadow of the restaurant, watching as hundreds of people thanked him for giving them a chance to survive, he felt that his mission was complete. Everything he could do, he had done. And now he could leave it in peace. Daniel closed his eyes, and in that moment, despite all the trials, he felt calm. He was no longer just the person handing out food. He had become someone who had discovered new strength within himself to change the lives of not only his loved ones, but the entire city. The project was over. Keanu perhaps had left, but his mark remained in Daniel's heart. This was an ending that wasn't final, but rather a liberation.